in the duplicate ID as a progression, or we can see it as a curve, we can see different regions and we can see different patterns. For example, we have a pattern A, which is found in steep regions of the curve, meaning that within a short time frame, a lot of challenges that are going to be issued are going to be duplicated later. And we can see a pattern B in smooth regions of the curve, meaning that within a time frame, the issued challenges are not going to be duplicated later. And we can also see a pattern C, which is found below the curve of IDs, which mimics a pattern A, and that means that within a short time frame, a lot of duplicate challenges were issued in the same way as a pattern A. So for us, this is enough information to carry some attacks.
So basically,
these are different sections of the 64K sample in chunks of 16K, and we can see all those patterns in this plot.
basically, I know that perhaps the graphs are kind of difficult to understand, not because they are very complex, but because you need to kind of have some time to understand them. But the thing is that you are seeing a lot of points everywhere. That means that within a very short period of time, the server is generating a lot of the same challenges. And like I said, this is very, very bad. That's the general idea for that. So just by taking into account that we know that the server is generating a lot of duplicates, what can we do with that? How can we exploit the fact that the server is generating within a very short period of time the same nonces over and over again? Well, the first two attacks that we're going to talk about are going to exploit that. Those are the passive replay attacks and the active collection of duplicate challenges. The third one, the active prediction of challenges, actually is a different flaw that we found in the same code and has nothing to do with the fact that the server is generating duplicate challenges. But we're going to talk about that later. Agustin is going to explain how that all works. So let's start with the passive replay attack. Basically, the attack is super simple. It's like I said before. You have a client that is, or you have a network where you have client and servers that are authenticating, performing NTLM authentication between themselves. And you have an attacker that can eavesdrop the traffic between them. What the attacker has to do is just listen to the traffic without doing nothing, just listen to the traffic that goes by from client to server and generates a dictionary that has the nonces generated by the server and the response, that is all that information that you see there in the table, that was sent back by the client to authenticate against the server. Once you have that, the only thing the attacker has to do now is, since he knows the server is going to generate a lot of duplicate challenges, so it is very likely that the challenges that he has in his table or dictionary are going to be generated again by the server, the attacker starts connecting over and over again against the server until the server returns one of the nonces that he observed previously by eavesdropping the traffic between the two. When he finds that situation, the attacker just gets from his dictionary the response that he got just by eavesdropping the traffic and sends back that response. And that alone is enough for the attacker to actually gain access to the SMB server as the user from which he obtained the response and the nonce. So it's very simple and it's kind of scary because someone can actually do this by doing nothing, just listening to your traffic. It's not exactly the same, but I would say it's equivalent to someone just sniffing a telnet session. One thing that you need to understand about NTLM that is relevant to this particular attack and also to some extent to the other attacks that we're going to show you is that there is more than one way or mode to perform NTLM authentication. And I'm not talking about NTLM version 1 or version 2. I'm talking about modes where the difference is given by the kind of packets that are exchanged to actually perform the NTLM authentication. The first slides that I show you where I had the examples of how NTLM version 1 and NTLM version 2 work, that can be called NTLM in plain mode or plain NTLM, regardless the version that you're using of NTLM. And there's another mode that is called by some people, SMB extended security or NTLM SSP. And the package, as you can see in this slide, is slightly different from the other package that I showed you before. The basic idea is if you see two machines actually using NTLM SSP to perform authentications, the code that generates the nonces or the challenges is some other code that is different from the code that where we found these flaws. So if you're trying to perform a passive replay attack against two machines that are using NTLM SSP, you won't be able to do so because the server is not going to generate duplicate challenges. Which mode is actually going to be used between two Windows machines is determined by a bit in a field that is called flags2 in the SMB header of the SMB negotiated protocol request packet. That is the first packet that is sent from the client to the server when the client wants to authenticate against the server. The thing about this is that for some time now, I think that starting with Windows 2000, Windows machines use between them the NTLM SSP mode. However, this does not mean that passive replay attacks are not possible, because like I said, the client can say to the server, hey server, I want to use the plain mode. And for example, SMB client with certain configuration options, and OS 10, for example, 10.3 and other operating systems, and for example, Windows NT, during the whole time where Windows NT was actually in use, Windows NT was never using NTLM SSP. So even nowadays, and a lot in the past, passive replay attacks were totally possible. And actually, in order to understand if your network actually is vulnerable to passive replay attacks, you have to understand all the clients that you have in your network. Because like I said, the mode that is going to be used can be determined by the client, and that determines if these attacks are possible or not. And actually, the fact that nowadays, Windows machines between them do not use NTLM SSP, that will work to our advantage to perform one more advanced attack, that is the prediction attack that we're going to show you next. We're going to explain you next why. Basically, it's because since the code that is vulnerable is not triggered that often, that helps us because the internal state of the PRNG that is used by that code is not modified so much, so that will allow us to actually predict the internal state of the PRNG. But don't worry about understanding that because you're going to see it in much more detail with Agustin later. When we're talking about the other attacks, we call the other attacks active attacks. This is the attack that I'm going to show you next. The fact about these modes and NTLM SSP and the plain mode doesn't matter because, like I said, the client can tell the server, use the mode that I want. And as an attacker, we can say to the server, use the mode that I want that I know is vulnerable. And that attack also includes some part of the attack where the client has to communicate with the attacker. And in that case, the attacker can also say to the server, hey, I want to use the vulnerable mode. So for the active attacks, we call them active because we are forcing the client to do something for us. In the passive replay attack, we just listen to the network traffic. That's why we call the attack passive. So for the active attack, you don't care about all these things with NTLM SSP. So pretty much, it's always exploitable. That's the bottom line. One thing that is interesting about NTLM version 2 is that actually to prevent pre-compute dictionary attacks, NTLM version 2 includes some entropy generated by the client. And it also includes, if you can see at the slide, there's a field that is hashed in the response sent from the client to the server, that the field is a timestamp. That is hashed with some other information. The thing is that the server could actually use that timestamp to determine if a response that he's receiving is old or was just created by a valid client. Well, the thing is that Windows does not check this timestamp at all. So you can create a dictionary today, and that same dictionary will be valid in 2 years, because Windows is not checking that the timestamp of the response was generated within a short period of time when he's receiving the response. This is something that has been happening since Windows NT4, I think. I don't know if later versions of Windows actually, for example, Vista or something like that, have fixed this issue, but we did a lot of tests with XP-SP3. It does not check nothing like this. And also the people of the Samba team also have published things about this saying that Windows NT does not check this. Even if this is the case, with Windows NTLM version 1, you don't have any kind of timestamp or nothing, so you can exploit and reuse and replay the responses all the time. They will never expire. You can use them forever as if you had the password. So the next attack is called active collection of duplicate challenges. The idea is the same. We want to build a dictionary where you have the nonces and the corresponding responses. But in this case, instead of getting the responses by just looking at the network traffic, you're going to force the client to give you the responses. So basically, the first thing that you do is you connect over and over again to the victim. It can be a workstation where some user is doing something. And you connect over and over again, and you create the first column of the dictionary or a list of nonces returned by the server. Once you have that, you want to obtain the corresponding responses for those nonces. So you actually have to force the client somehow to give you those responses. The most, I would say, common way to do this, and very well known, is, for example, send an email with a link to a website, or with embedded HTML with some multiple image tags that will, when rendered, will make a connection to the attacker that is running a custom SMB server. So you send an email with all these image tags, and when the user receives this email or goes to a web page, someplace on the internet, if they are using Internet Explorer, for example, that will cause the workstation to start performing authentication attempts against the attacker. At that point, what the attacker wants to do is get the responses for the nonces that he has. So he sends back the nonces that he got in the previous step to the client. The client will give the attacker the response for that nonce, and the attacker in this way will do this over and over again for all the nonces that he has in his dictionary, and will complete the dictionary with all the nonces and the responses. Once the attacker has the dictionary with all the nonces and the responses, again, the attacker knows, because of all the things we research and we show you with the graphs, we know that the server or the victim will generate, for sure, one of the nonces that we have in our dictionary. So the only thing that we do is we start connecting over and over again against the workstation until the workstation or victim sends back one of the nonces or challenges that we have in our dictionary. When that happens, we're going to send back the response that we obtained from the client or the victim, and we're going to be able to gain access to that machine. All these things that I'm mentioning can be done in, I don't know, seconds, like 1 minute, something like that. So it's pretty quick. I mean, also one thing that we observe when doing all these attacks is that if you go to some machine and you get from that server a lot of challenges, then you can go to other server and also request a lot of challenges from this other server, and you're going to obtain the same nonces that the other server gave you. So basically this means that two servers will generate duplicate challenges between themselves. So you can do the attack to one machine and then move to another machine, and you can use the same dictionary with other machine. So this is kind of interesting because you can attack one workstation, for example, in an internal network, something like that, and then you can go to some other machine where the user you're attacking has an account, or if you're in a domain, a machine where the user can actually connect to because he has permissions to do so, and use the same dictionary over and over again. It's like having the password. It's almost the same thing. And not only that, we also realized that you can turn